Hey everybody, thanks so much for tuning in today. The question I get asked quite often is, what should I, meaning you, practice? And then conversely, what do I, meaning me, practice? That's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome back everybody to my channel. Eddie Heinzelman here, talking about guitar and gear and who knows what. Thank you again for joining, and I really appreciate your support. So before we get much further, hit that subscribe button. And today we're going to talk about practice routines. The question always comes up of what is your particular practice routine and what should someone practice? And I think that really depends on what your goals are and what you are doing and what level you're at playing guitar. For example, when you start playing guitar, a beginner's practice sessions are going to vary and be different than someone who's been playing a few years or someone who is focused on a particular technique or learning a particular skill. And that's sort of typical among guitar players and musicians as they develop and as they learn. So what I'm going to use is my particular method or practice routine over the years, how it has shifted. As an example, when I started playing guitar, I was 8, 9 years old and I started taking classical guitar lessons. Now, as a beginner, the techniques that I was learning were basically about reading standard notation and learning how to play particular pieces. My practice routine at 8, 9 years old was 30 minutes to an hour every day, learning something new that my teacher had put in front of me, and then each lesson I would play that and perform that, and then I would get something new to learn for the next week. This is how it progressed for the first couple years as I developed and learned how to read. Pieces got more advanced as we went along. Where things took a little bit of a shift, when I was 12 years old, I got the rock and roll bug and I got my first electric guitar. At that point, I wanted to learn how to play lead guitar and improvise and do my own guitar solos and learn rock songs. So that completely shifted the way that I practiced. I still was studying classical music at that time, and so I still did an hour a day learning the pieces that my teacher had me learning, and then I would do another hour learning how to play scales and chords, and then learning songs and riffs and licks, starting to develop the techniques that I needed to be able to improvise. That lasted basically from 12 to 15. I would practice for 2 hours a day, and then I would learn songs. Now at the age of 13, 14, I started playing in bands. And so then that added another layer of learning repertoire and learning songs on top of the practice that I was doing. At the age of 15, I started studying jazz, so my practice routine changed significantly. At this point, I was no longer studying with a classical teacher. I was no longer studying with rock or blues teachers. I was studying with just a jazz instructor. Now I'm playing in country and rock bands at this time, so I'm still learning, but at this point, by 15, 16 years old, I have the fundamentals of how to transcribe. So anything that I needed to learn rock and country, I would transcribe on my own. What I was really focusing on at 15, 16 years old was wanting to learn advanced theory and advanced harmony and the advanced scales that I needed in order to play jazz, and at the same time prepare myself for auditioning for college. At this point, I would break my practice routine down into 30 to 45 minute segments, and each one was designated on a technique or something that I would work on and need to learn. For example, at 16 years old, I'm practicing about 3 hours a day. If I broke that down into half-hour segments, I might spend a half hour playing scales, more scale exercises, so to speak, playing all 7 patterns, focusing on playing diminished scales and whole tone scales and things like that. Then I would switch and I would play arpeggios. Then I might take 30 minutes and I would learn a song, focus on learning a jazz tune, learning the melody and the changes. Then I would take another 30 minutes and I would play scale exercises over those changes, where I would stay in one position and I would change the scale depending on the chord change as it went by. Then I would go through and play arpeggios in eighth notes in that exact same fashion, changing the arpeggio in the same position as the chord change came by. It was all kinds of things like this that I structured out to focus my attention and my practice time to get the most out of it that I possibly could. At 18, 19, I auditioned for college. I made the waiting list because they only took one student a year in the guitar program. And then I made it into the program the following year. By the time I'm 18, 19, I'm in college, but I'm practicing about 4 to 5 hours a day in preparation for these auditions. I'm still playing in bands. I'm playing in rock bands, I'm playing in country bands on the weekends, still rehearsing with those bands, learning songs. So I spent a lot of time playing guitar. Once I made it into college, I kept this routine up of where I then had a specific list of things that I had to learn for the teachers and for school. So I had so many songs I had to learn every year. I had to learn scales, I had to learn licks, hundreds of licks, transposing them into all keys. So all of these requirements that you have to do when you're in music school, so I would add those to my routine. And when I was in college at the conservatory, I was practicing 6+ hours a day on these types of techniques, these fundamental techniques. I was then performing 1 to 2 hours a day in lab band combos, guitar combos, things like that. Again, then doing jazz gigs, then doing country gigs, doing rock gigs, all of that stuff at the same time. One thing completely changed my practice routine in college, and that was saxophonist Joe Henderson came to school one day to do a lecture/workshop and to perform with the school big band. Joe Henderson is one of my favorite jazz saxophonists of all time, and so it was a real thrill for me to get to meet him and attend this workshop and actually get to perform with him during the show. He was a very soft-spoken man, and somebody in the workshop actually asked him this question: what is your practice routine? Of course, everyone assumed Joe Henderson, writing all of these incredible tunes and his amazing improvisation, his practice routine must be incredible. And he looked at us and he said, I only practice 2 things. He says, I play all my scale exercises every single day. He said, that is crucial. That's so important. He says, the other thing I do is I transcribe something every day. And somebody said, you don't focus on learning licks or other techniques? And he said, no, I've practiced 2 things every day. And that really got me thinking. And so here I am at 20, 21 years old, and I decide that I'm going to put Joe's practice into play for myself. So I decide that I'm going to continue practicing scales, and part of my scale exercises is still practicing arpeggios and playing changes. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is transcribe. So all of my licks, all of my language of improvisation are going to come from real world examples. I only learned at that point licks I had to learn from the method books that were required for our boards, for our juries at the end of the year. From that point on, I stopped learning just licks to be learning licks, and I learned solos, complete solos. I totally understood why Joe Henderson was talking about transcribing every day. You're developing your ear. 20 plus years ago, the technology to slow things down was pretty limited. So you really had to focus your listening in order to transcribe, hear things coming through in real time and play them over and over and over so you could sing the lick as it went by and then pick out the notes on your instrument. It was amazing ear training, and it still is. I still recommend transcribing to every student. What I found was I started to develop the sense of phrasing and structure as solos would go by, and as I would start to incorporate this phrasing and structure into my playing. Again, not necessarily copying licks or stringing licks together, but thinking of phrases as melodies. And that really changed my improvisation from that point on. At the same time now, I'm playing more and more country gigs and things like that, where I start to learn more and more songs outside of jazz. And I use this same technique. I start to transcribe everything that came through. I would transcribe everything note for note, but at the same time, I would start to put in my own flair. It's sort of the way I approached improvisation from the beginning. So I would play signature licks, but in spots where it wasn't as important, I would throw in my own phrases. Again, that's still part of my approach today. But when people ask me now, what do I practice? And I still, like Joe Henderson, prescribe to practicing scales and then transcribing. Practice routine will be different depending on certain things. There are certain times where I will practice specific techniques and say, I need to learn this, or I need to develop this skill. And so I will practice that skill. But in general, my practice technique changed once I got to my senior year in college, and I adopted the process of practicing scales and then transcribing. The other place that I think this process has really helped me is once I got out of college, I also started focusing on songwriting. And I think that development of ear training and phrasing and practice that I did has really helped in the way that I approach songwriting and composition. Now, is this the right thing for you to do? I don't know. That's completely up to you. As I tell all of my students anytime, what you really want to do is you want to focus on the things that you need to focus on. That's why scales and practicing scales, as monotonous and boring as some people think it is, are a staple and a fundamental of what I practice and what I do. Transcribing, again, is something I do every day. It doesn't have to be an entire song or an entire solo, but I transcribe something every day. And typically the way that I've been performing lately with a lot of different artists, that's always been something that came really easy. I always had a list of songs that I needed to learn for an artist to do a show. Here's 10 songs. Okay, well there's 10 songs I have to transcribe over the next few days. Well, here's 20 songs, and then you learn those 20 songs. And then one year for CMA Fest alone, 1 week, I had to perform 100 songs with different artists. So there were all these songs to learn. And that's a process unto itself, learning a bulk of songs. We'll talk about that in another video. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying that the only things you need to practice are scales and transcriptions of things. What I'm saying is your development and your practice routine may change over time as you focus on different skills and need to learn different techniques. So what I recommend is outlining the things that you need to practice, making a schedule of a small list of times that you can put these things together and focus on 20, 30, 45 minutes. Do that practice. Take a break for hand health, give yourself a rest, and then go back and practice some more. As you then develop, you can change what you're practicing and what you're focusing on. But by breaking it into smaller segments, it helps you focus and streamline your practice. My practice routine has been the same for many years, and that is scale exercise and work and transcribing something just like one of my heroes, Joe Henderson. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. I really appreciate your support. There's lots more to come, so please hit that subscribe button, and as always, stay tuned.